So it's great to have you here, Harold Brown, director and founder of Farm Kind, and person who's been featured in a number of documentaries, including one recently called Peaceable Kingdom, put out by a local Ithaca group. It's Ithaca, right?
Mm-hmm.
Tribe of Heart. Um, we're happy to hear a little bit about your kind of personal background with some of these issues related to the ethics of eating, and also maybe to supplement some of the other things that we've been doing in the course related to animal issues, meat issues, vegetarian versus vegan issues, and how ethical questions relate to practices like that. So maybe I could just start by asking you to say something about your personal history with these issues as, I think, a dairy farmer and a beef farmer for many years, and then now more of a activist in the vegan community.
Right. Well, I started out like any farm kid in America would. Um, grew up on a small farm in Michigan, south central Michigan, and we were primarily a beef farm, but the farms around us were owned by my great uncles, and they were. My one great uncle across the road, he raised sheep, so at any given time he had 500 to 1,000 head of sheep. My other great uncle had a dairy, which was down the road from us, and so I had experience with both of those things. And I worked 3 years at a dairy plant in Michigan. But to kind of go back to the beginning, I was like any farm kid in the United States. I was indoctrinated into this particular relationship with nature and animals and agriculture. And, it was a... I do want to say that when I say indoctrination, I don't mean that kind of in a pejorative way, is that we're all indoctrinated by our parents with it's the values, that we believe and, knowing right from wrong and so on. So my indoctrination was, typical farmer indoctrination in that how I was to relate to nature, to wildlife, and how wildlife interplayed with farm animals, and so on. But then, we also had dogs and cats, and that was a different relationship.
So livestock on the one hand, pets on the other hand.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
And it was an entirely different relationship. So there was this kind of mental break that you grow up with, that you love one but you eat the other, know. And everything basically in my world validated this indoctrination. I mean, it started, of course, with my parents and then my family. I grew up on my grandparents' farm. And then it was our larger farming community, and then 4-H, church, school, FFA. And if nothing else, it was commercials on TV. Because every commercial break has a food ad.
Right.
And I'm going, wow, we're doing good work. We're feeding a hungry country.
Yeah, where's the beef? Milk it does a body good, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Milk mustache ads and all the rest of it. It's basically indoctrinating people in another way into making what they think are their own food choices. But it's actually just really good PR and marketing.
So what was the transition point for you?
Transition point for me was that I was working at the dairy and in this plant, and I was injured, and I had to have some medical care, and they did blood work on me. And they said, we need to have a consultation because we see some issues with your blood. And it turned out to be the same as my dad. My dad at that point had had a bypass, and he had had a stroke, which took his speech and his ability to work with numbers. And I didn't want to go down that path. And this doctor said, if you don't straighten out your blood, you're going to probably have a bypass by the time you're 35. So I said, what do I do? And I said, the best doctors at the University of Michigan Hospital keep telling my dad what to do, but every 5 years he's having a coronary event. And he had more after that. Wow. So he said, well, your problem is triglycerides. He said, you can't eat ice cream. I loved ice cream. And so I had to give that up. And he said anytime eating saturated fats, and particularly animal saturated fats with sugar, so desserts and what animal products I eat. So he said, to be safe, as a start, no ice cream, no red meat. And that was the beginning of my kind of journey of understanding how to reverse my heart disease.
Okay, so that was the health alarm that was raised by your doctor. And then how did it shift to a more of a kind of ethical concern?
Well, I was on a plant-based diet, basically. I started in 1990,
Okay.
and that's when I moved away from the farm. So it was actually the ethical aspect of it was an intellectual exercise because I was around people then that were bringing these topics up, kind of animal rights theory, and so on. And I did a very little bit of reading about it, but it just wasn't something that entered my consciousness, you know, and I just didn't understand it. So I just left it alone. But my health was improving so much, I was like this crazy person, you know, wow, look what I've done, you know, I feel better than I've ever felt in my life, wow, wow, wow. But the ethical aspect of it didn't kick in until about 1996, so it was 6 years later.
So you leave the farm in 1990, and then for 6 years
I'm on a plant-based
you're on a
diet.
plant-based diet, and then you start thinking about some of the ethical aspects of it.
Yeah, that was actually, I was learning a little bit more, but then it was an interaction with a steer at a sanctuary that basically took the last layer of the onion away. And I finally realized that their lives matter too. I mean, this is the key point that I had basically shut out of my mind all of my life is that this idea that their lives don't matter to them.
Okay.
So I realized their lives do matter to them. The things I'd seen about the social interactions of cattle growing up and so on, I had seen these things, but they didn't register as actually something a sentient being would do. You know, I could see the similarities between what they did and what humans do, but there was this very clear divide about allowing those two things to merge.
So someone says to you, I agree that there's a sense in which to animals, their lives matter, to the animals themselves. But we're more important in some sense and we have control, and so we would prefer to eat meat and consume dairy and so forth. And that's ultimately more important than what they think about their lives. And we can kill them in a cruelty-free way and humanely, and so there's not much pain and suffering involved.
Well, the problem I have with that is that it goes back to this idea that some lives are of more value than others. Okay. And in my opinion, that's what's wrong with everything in the world. But every social justice cause goes back to this idea that some life is worth more than others. And what I have learned over my journey is that the root of that is speciesism. All other isms have grown out of that over the last 10,000 years. And we now, I now understand that sexism, ageism, ableism, racism, all comes out of speciesism. Because if we can devalue the largest part of the biomass of this planet as being the other, then it makes it so much easier to, we can, when we create those kinds of differentiations, then it makes it easy for us to abuse each other.
But aren't the differentiations based in something? I mean, we have reasoning abilities, we have language abilities, we can make jokes and laugh, we can suffer in deeper ways. We're aware of ourselves self-consciously in deeper ways. So isn't there a basis for these species distinctions, or at least a bright red line between us and all the rest of them?
No.
Why do you say that?
No, because that buys into this idea of kind of human, what I call human exceptionalism. Yeah. In other words, another problem I see in the world is our clinging to hierarchies. The hierarchies we create, and we've created them all, is what has been foundationally the biggest problem we have. In that's how we're able to either financially, socially, personally be able to exploit each other, is because we create a hierarchy. And we feel that I'm better than you, I'm better than that person, I'm better than that person of color. And it isn't always overt. A lot of times it's a lot of dog whistle stuff that comes in, but it's there. And you know, it's a unique idea really to Western culture, because in Eastern traditions, they don't see it that way. And it's, you know, there's a historical timeline to that, but it's a, you know, the Abrahamic traditions invested into herding culture. The non-Abrahamic traditions did not. And it created a different social construct, social contracts, different kinds of hierarchies. Some have no hierarchies, like the Jains. And I think that that is a healthier way of being in the world, because it's like Martin Luther King said, you know, when injustice exists anywhere, it exists everywhere.
So your answer is there might be these differences, but they're not morally relevant differences. No. What's morally relevant is that these are beings who have certain kind of interests and preferences, and we're taking away the rights that attach to those interests and preferences. Do you want to speak in terms of rights, or?
Well, yeah, you could speak in rights, but it's just this ability to, as I put it, a lot of people talk about animal rights. To me, I have a very simple definition for that. It's allowing all beings to live on their own terms. I mean, I want to live on my own terms as much as I can within this society, and but because of hierarchies that exist around me, I can't at all times. But it's what we impose upon, you know, farm animals, among free living animals. Those, they do not live on their own terms. They are at our whim, and you know, a lot are going into extinction. We're in the 6th grade extinction on this planet, and we're the cause. And that comes back to this idea that some lives are worth more than others.
What about insects? So you mentioned the Jains and their traditions. I mean, do you go that far, or?
I try to, but again, you know, I'm not perfect. I mean, this is the whole idea that there's this idea that's really a media construct, that vegans are these purists, they have like these absolutes that they live by. Well, there are certain ideas of right and wrong, but nobody's perfect at it, and we try to do the best we can. The way I put it is I try to live as morally consistent in my life as I can. It's not perfect, and it never will be, but I try to be as morally consistent as I can.
Do you think of it as a universal ethic? I mean, is this your calling or your spiritual quest or that's sort of special to you and maybe some other people, or is it something you think we all ought to do, should have a duty to do?
Both, actually. I would say that it's something that has definitely been a spiritual journey for me. And I know a lot of other people that have gone on it. I mean, these are vegans. Yeah. That's what veganism is. It's not a diet. It is a ethical and moral way of being in the world and trying to live ethically and morally consistently in the world. I think if we want a world of peace, I think so. I mean, if we're truly committed to peace, we don't abuse others, we don't exploit others, we don't hurt, harm, kill others. And, you know, like the Eastern traditions understand this. Of course, they're not perfect at it either, and they've been at it an awfully long time. But, you know, it's a striving for.
One of our other speakers is an animal scientist here, a food scientist, who says that it's the rising demand for meat and animal products in Asia in particular, in the East, that is going to force us to implement factory farming methods in a much more intensive way across the globe. So are you thinking of that as a departure from what you're calling the Eastern tradition or way?
Well, yeah, and that's really a really salient example of the power of Madison Avenue. I mean, if anybody's read the book Fast Food Nation by Eric Schlosser, you understand that these countries that have a 5,000-year history in not eating animals are now eating animals, but it's because of American agribusiness. It's because of fast food. India is a good example. McDonald's goes there, opens up restaurants, didn't serve meat for quite a few years, but then they introduced curried chicken sandwiches. They still don't serve beef, but they have curried chicken sandwiches. And then when that became acceptable in the market to a certain extent, they felt there was a certain tipping point, then they moved in. And now India is one of the largest broiler chicken producers in the world. And it's because of American agribusiness. It's kind of the free market idea that when you saturate a market, you create new markets. Tobacco industry did the same thing. When they got their butt in trouble here in the United States, where they go, China. Now you've got a couple billion people to market to, who traditionally there isn't much smoking, except in the very large cities. But they're making money hand over fist. It worked.
So let me ask you about a different kind of model and see what you think. So you seem to associate harm and killing in kind of one sentence and think to kill something is to harm it. It's to take away something it prefers, namely longevity or a longer life. There's a kind of middle-of-the-road model that we confront in these discussions that you might think of as the happy meat model or the Joel Salatin model. Down on Polyface Farms, Michael Pollan tells us about it. There's all these happy animals, and they are allowed to graze and allowed to roam, and they are grass-fed, and then they have one bad day. And maybe it's not even that bad. They just have one bad moment at the very end. But we all face such a moment at the very end. And as long as they've had a pretty good life up till then, yes, it's being cut short, but they've had a nice existence, and we get to eat kind of happy meat and feel much better about it and ourselves. What's wrong with that middle-of-the-road model?
Well, still, it's taking the life away from someone who would prefer not to give up their life for your gustatory desire. Nothing more. Nothing more.
Because we don't need it nutritionally.
We don't need it. I mean, the science is in. We proved it. The American Dietetic Association, the ADA, is showing that, that a plant-based diet is preferable.
For all demographics? Pregnant women, lactating women, children? Okay.
Yep. And, it's, and everything you see counter to that, it's like, I always tell people, follow the money. If you see research that says, oh, no, that, children must, say, drink dairy, who funded that study? That's the thing. Who's got an axe to grind? Who is funding the study? It's always, always follow the money. And when you do that, you're going to find out that these things will, they publish what supports their thing. It's like Tony Robbins, the motivational speaker, says, we all love good news about our bad habits. And that's absolutely true. It's human nature. Right. We want validation for the things we do. And we don't want to move out of our comfort zone. That's what makes this such a thorny topic for so many people, is because we're asking people, it's food, that's a primal thing for human beings, it's for any animal, is that you're questioning their food. And then there's a moral aspect to it. And that is something, whether it's you have it in a religious foundation or in some other form of belief system, it's questioning those kinds of things can be really difficult for people.
It gets people's guard up very quickly.
Oh, absolutely.
So the short answer is, I, Harold Brown, don't like the Mark Bittman, Michael Pollan, Joel Salatin middle-of-the-road model because to kill is to harm, and to harm is wrong.
Well, let's put it this way. If the shoe is on the other foot, okay, then let's say that I deem that you have had a very productive life, you've accomplished a lot in academia and stuff, but I think this Friday is a day that, according to my metric, is you have met the full potential of your usefulness, as far as I'm concerned. So you're going to have one bad day, and you'll die according to my prescription. Most humans would say, I don't like that. I wouldn't want that to happen to me or to anybody I know. But it comes back to this idea of what's humane. According to Webster's New American Collegiate Dictionary, the definition for humane is framed by 3 words. It's framed by the word, 3 words are kindness, compassion, and mercy. And, you know, you can raise a farm animal kindly and compassionately, but we never ever show them mercy. We take all of their lives. So it's bogus. I mean, it's absolutely frickin' bogus to call any animal product humane. We shouldn't call them, you know, the practices of raising farm animals humane farm practices. They should be called, I think, a better word would be husbandry, because that's an older term which has disappeared from the lexicon of, it's now called animal science.
Right.
But animal husbandry is a more genuine term for what people are doing, and there's nothing humane about it. I mean, these animals are not living on their own terms. We alter them for the sake of making things humane. You know, it's like, well, if people are worried about, you know, this is a major problem, is that we are now a generation and a half removed in America from agriculture. About 1% of the population grows food in the United States. So the animal industry in particular knows that it has a problem psychologically with selling what it has to give to the public, because they know that the public is going to, if they think about that cow, that pig, that chicken, they're going to anthropomorphize that animal via their cat or dog. That's a problem, and they know it. So what they have to do is create anthropomorphic advertising. I mean, they accuse animal activists of anthropomorphizing farm animals. It doesn't come close. Think of the happy cow thing. Right. Talking cows on TV, or people dressed up as cows, arguing about whether they're going to try soy milk. Yeah, it's like, eat more chicken. Right. You know, it's ridiculous, and everybody does it. You know, but who's doing it in, you know, a legitimate way and who isn't?
So one argument you often hear in response to things like this is that there's a kind of, I mean, maybe it's an anthropomorphizing of the species. It's as though there's a kind of deal between us and some of the species that we domesticate and then raise to allow their species to flourish and propagate and come, you know, for there to be many individuals of that species. So we make this deal with the bovine species or with the pig species, and they, in a way, flourish, although individuals have their lives cut short for our purposes. They, as a species, flourish. And you could even put that in terms of the individuals. You could say, look, they wouldn't have had any life at all. They wouldn't have existed if it wasn't for our gustatory pleasure and our husbandry of them. So why is it better for them never to have existed at all than to get the shortened but still relatively pain-free life that they do get on the happy farm?
Well, that's right there is the thing. It's domestication. Yeah. That's the problem. Things started to go to hell for the human species when we domesticated plants and animals 8,000 to 10,000 years ago, because that's when we created the other. And that is when we started to see the devaluation of women, the devaluation, the disempowerment of women, the disempowerment of people of color. It all came down to who had the cattle, who had the power, who had the land. And that was when things, you know, I can make an argument, it gets pretty involved, I can make an argument that basically every ill we have in the world came from agriculture back then. But that's just it. This idea, we are so comfortable with the idea of domestication that, you know, whether it's breeding cats and dogs for our pleasure, or in this case, breeding farm animals for our pleasure, it's for no other reason. But the point is would you do, I mean, there was a time in Europe where they tried to breed dwarves for royalty.
For their pleasure.
For their pleasure, yeah. Because they were entertainment. They would actually get 2 dwarves in a court and have sex, and they thought they would get another dwarf. Well, genetically it doesn't work out that way. But if you were the parent of a dwarf, then the king or the queen would pay you handsomely for that child, and that child would have a wonderful life. Would be in the lap of luxury in the court for the rest of their lives, and the parents were taken care of very well too. But they were trying actually to breed dwarves, and it isn't much different than the breeding of slaves and stuff. It's creating, these false relationships between what we want, but what we really need. I mean, that's the way I look at humans. We think ourselves adults and all of this, but we never grow up. We're always children. Because then, you take a little kid to the store, I want this, I want that. No, you can't have the candy right now. You wait. You don't need that right now. But when we become adults, we don't have anybody telling us that anymore. And we want things, but we never ask ourselves, do we truly need it? I mean, that's how we overconsume. That's how we overeat. That's how we do a lot of different things that aren't really good for us.
Is there a worry here that you're characterizing cultures and societies where meat eating and animal products are a big part of the lifestyle and history as children in a way that's potentially demeaning? I mean, yes, we all have Thanksgiving dinners and meatloaf potlucks or something like that, and maybe we could give those up. But I can think of other cultures that we read about and know about, both on this continent and elsewhere, where it seems like animal products play a central role in the religious, cultural life of the society, of the family. Mm-hmm. Do you feel like it's a little insensitive to say, those people too are just acting like children going after their desires?
No, not at all. And the thing is it's nothing wrong with being a child. Oh. And the thing is that we all grow up at a different rate. And we all learn at a different rate. We all develop our consciousness at a different rate on different topics, different things. And we learn at different rates. But to say that we are generally, as a species, children, I think it's a fair, it's a fair assessment. We want to think of ourselves as being more than that, but that's ego speaking, and that's where we really get in trouble, is when our ego tends to drive our decision making.
So let me change to another topic that I wanted to ask you about, which is the difference between vegetarianism and veganism. So I think you must get these kind of questions all the time, but maybe some people are moved by the thought that, okay, the happy meat maybe isn't so happy, or I'm worried about taking away the lives of these individuals before their natural lifespans are up. But look, I mean, they're producing milk, and the cows seem very happy to be milked. They seem uncomfortable when they're not milked. There's an excess that seems to go beyond what they're providing even for their calves, if their calves are allowed to stick around. And then, on the egg side, there's all these chickens producing lots and lots of eggs, and they don't seem to have much use for them. So why can't we let's treat them well and then take some of these products and use them, or, honey from the bees. So what do you say about those more controversial cases?
Well, to me, it's not controversial, because basically everything to me comes back to the golden rule, always. Do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. Do I have their permission to do any of that? I think they can't give me permission.
The cows, like I said, sometimes seem pretty happy to be milked.
Well, yeah, because we're impregnating them every year to keep them lactating at a heavy rate. And yeah, it's painful for them not to be milked. Right. But the thing is if you weren't impregnating them every 10 to 11 months, then they dry up, and they don't need to be milked. People just assume that cows give milk. They don't. They have the same gestation period as the humans, 9 months. And then, you take away the calf anywhere from 24 to 72 hours after it's born, because, number one, you don't want them to bond. And occasionally farmers get killed by mothers who don't want their calves taken away. It doesn't happen very often, but it does. And then even after you take them away, the cows can beller for a long time, days, because, any mother that loses its child grieves, and they grieve for a while. And, we want to think of them as dumb brutes, and we have really worked hard to selectively breed them to be extremely docile, especially dairy cattle. But that familial bond is always there. And, we don't want to be honest. I mean, about that relationship we have with them or that they have with each other. And we are learning more and more and more all the time in the cognitive sciences about the abilities of animals, both free-living and domestic. How many animals can use tools, make tools and use them. Problem solving that is beyond even a 10-year-old child. I've seen cows figure out how to open latches on gates with either the nose or their tongue and get out because they want to be out, but again, it comes back to this idea that domestication is okay and that we can use them however we see fit and doesn't take them account. And it's a question that people ask, like vegetarians consume generally eggs and dairy products, right, where vegans don't consume any animal products at all. And it really comes back to this idea of animals living on their own terms and that we don't have permission. We can't ask for permission, and that we wouldn't want somebody to take stuff from us without permission. So why would we do that to them? Well, with vegetarians, we all have blinders on to different things in many different ways. And that's just part of being human. We're all on this kind of journey of trying to understand the world, and we build our own walls, quite honestly. With domesticated animals, though, it's people will ask me, well, does that mean they'll go extinct? Yeah, they'll go extinct because they don't exist in nature otherwise. I mean, all cattle, I think there's like dozens of breeds of dairy cattle. There's quite a few breeds of beef cattle. They all came from a common ancestor called an auroch. And the last one died in 1610 in a zoo in Europe. And it was, they're extinct now, but we've really done a good job. I actually had a dairy professor once that said, we have a right to use them because they are our creation.
I see.
And this is a kind of a common thread. This is that you see in agriculture. It really got a foundation in the Green Revolution, but it is this idea that nature as a whole is chaos, and that our responsibility, our obligation as agriculturalists is to bring order to the chaos. And in the Green Revolution, it was literally to bring nature to heel and to make it do our bidding. And we got really good at it. We got really good at it. But that was also a shift in thinking. My grandparents, they didn't buy into that. They said this is not a natural way of living in the world. Even though they were totally cool with domestication of farm animals, they saw that this chemical agriculture and this idea of intensive animal and plant agriculture is not living in harmony with the planet. And a lot of people believe that now. I mean, you're seeing a shift back to organic agriculture and so on. And the happy meat thing feeds to that.
But your main objection to taking milk from cows and making it into cheese and so forth is that it always relies on the ongoing fertilization of cows or impregnation of cows in a way that is completely unnatural and forced. And the taking away of their calves at a very early age where the calves then end up as veal. So there's really no model, no sustainable or economically viable model for dairy that doesn't participate in some of these, what you think of as morally objectionable practices.
No, and on top of that, we're in an environmental crisis too, and there is no sustainable animal agricultural model that can be used. I mean, NASA even understands this, that we cannot. The UN report that came out in, 2003 or 4, called The Long Shadow of Livestock, showed that 18% of all greenhouse gases is generated by livestock, which at 18% is more than all global transportation put together. Well, there's been 2 subsequent studies that have been done by international panels that have looked at this, and it's even more than that. It's the one that came out from, it's a World Watch Institute's website, but it was basically climate scientists from the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. They said, no, it's more like 51%. And then there is another group of independent scientists that from around the world that looked at that research, said, no, it's more like 58%. So it's the number one thing that the number one way we're destroying this planet is through animal agriculture. And there is no debate about that. There is actually a documentary out now called Cowspiracy that these 2 young men looked at this. They went to every single environmental group in the United States and they said, look at these 3 pieces of research. They got stonewalled by all of them. And we're talking like 24 or 30 environmental groups. Not that they contest the science. It's just that they know it's not something they can sell to their donors.
Right.
You know, checkbook activism is how things work these days. And you don't tell your people that if you're really going to be an environmentalist, you don't eat animal products. That's off the table, and they won't even approach it. But since that documentary has come out, I believe it's Oceana has now embraced that, and the Rainforest Alliance. Those 2 have said, no, you're right. And we're telling our people that the only way we're going to be able to protect species, to keep, you know, to have any sort of future, not necessarily a viable future, but any sort of future, is by stopping animal agriculture in its tracks now. If we don't, the game's over.
So this is bovine methane as well as runoff from pig farms and things like that. What about the chickens and the bees? Yeah. People probably ask vegans this all the time, but what's your answer? I mean, again, the chickens are producing these eggs, the bees are producing this honey. What's the... yes, we can't ask them for it exactly, but it doesn't look like it's too problematic to use it since they're just depositing it anyway. What's the problem?
Well, again, like you said, my first and foremost thing is I can't ask permission. But the other thing is like with chickens, especially hybridized chickens, is that they lay so many eggs in, say, a year's period that it scavenges. Those shells are made of almost entirely calcium. And where does that come from? Partly their diet, but mostly from their skeleton. And if chickens in the wild, I mean, all chickens, the only place on the planet where chickens are indigenous is Indonesia. They're jungle fowl. And their unfertile eggs are eaten by the chickens and other animals, but particularly the chickens because they eat their own shells, and that replenishes the calcium that they otherwise lose. With bees, we are seeing the problem with that because what we do, I had an uncle who had an apiary for years and years and years, and we pull the racks of honey out, then you put racks of sugar water in. Well, why are some of the reasons that people eat honey? Is because it's a natural antibiotic. Oh. There's something in it called propolis, which is a natural antibiotic. They have opened up jars out of the tombs in Egypt, and they were sealed with wax, but when they opened it up, the ones of honey, they're totally fine, viable, because it is a natural antibiotic in it, and it doesn't spoil. Honey does not spoil. So it's, if you seal it up, it doesn't spoil, it doesn't go bad. And this is one of the reasons why it's historically been seen as a healing food. And then now you can buy capsules of propolis or royal jelly, right, and so on and so forth. But if, what is honey? It's bee vomit. So, so the bees, they puke up this stuff and they put it in their comb and stuff, but it's the perfect food for them. And now we're seeing colony collapses, which we don't fully understand why it's happening. Right. But it's bee colonies tend to be much less healthy when they're expected to winter over on sugar water. So it's, but again, we don't fully understand why colonies are collapsing.
Just wait, so just to clarify, so we take the honey and replace it with sugar water and let them winter over on the sugar water, and that might be harming them. I see.
Yeah, because there's problems with mites and there's problems with funguses and so on that attack the bees and kill them. And those funguses probably, in my opinion, would probably not be a problem if they were eating their own honey because it has a natural antibiotic in it, which would probably take care of the bacteria, which attacks their body. So I don't claim to be an expert about bees, but it's kind of a common sense thing, you know. It's like, you know, a life of observation tends to serve us very well, you know, but we tend to be very reductionist in our view of nature, our view of most things.
So my suspicion is that if you asked a lot of vegetarians why they don't go vegan, it wouldn't be about the honey or even the milk, but it would be about the cheese.
Yes,
why is it so hard to give up cheese?
100% of the time it's cheese. I've got so many vegetarian friends.
Right.
But there's a reason for that. There is actually a chapter that anybody can read in Dr. Neil Bernard's book called Breaking the Food Seduction that deals with this phenomena. And we are the only species on the planet that doesn't wean itself. We wean ourselves from human breast milk, but we do not wean ourselves from dairy. All other animals do, all other mammals do, but we don't. And there's a pretty good reason for that. Drinking cow's milk, that's an animal that grows very quickly. You know, you give birth to an animal that weighs about 50 pounds, and with a year it's going to weigh probably 500 pounds. Humans don't grow at that rate. The hormones that are in dairy are suited for a mammal that grows at that rate. But all breast milk, whether it's human breast milk, dog breast milk, rat breast milk, all breast milk has something in it that's bonded to the protein in milk, which is called casein. It's bonded to, it's called casomorphine. Yeah, well, you absolutely want an infant to be addicted to its mother's milk because the colostrum and so on that's in that milk is what kickstarts the immune system of that individual. And it's crucial that they get it. But, you know, you only need it through those few formative months. After that, you know, it's a good source protein and other things, but again, we're talking about humans eating the mammary excretion of bovine, which has so much more casomorphine than human breast milk would, ounce for ounce.
Plus the cheese intensifies that.
Right. It takes approximately 10 fluid gallons of milk to make 1 pound of cheese. So you have a 10-to-1 concentration. That's why cheese is so, you have a 10-to-1 concentration of the casomorphine. That is why it's so. And again, you know, if this is borne out by people like T. Colin Campbell, who used to teach here at Cornell, Dr. Neil Bernard. I mean, this is just hard science. And we do become addicted. And the interesting thing, this is actually an interesting thing I have observed about people, particularly about cheese and about dairy, but about animal products in general. When you talk about it, and then you kind of posit something that might challenge their beliefs or their habits, the language they use is the language of addiction.
I just can't give it up.
Yeah, it's like listening to somebody, you know, that's trying to give up cigarettes or trying to give up caffeine or trying to give up heroin or any other addictive substance or behavior, gambling or whatever it might be. The language is the same. It's absolutely the same. It's fascinating.
And if I say, well, but again, there are cultures or societies or groups, religious groups, that have brought dairy products or animal products into their traditions in really important ways, such that asking them to give it up would be asking them to give up this central part of their tradition. You would say something like, well, you know, if they had brought heroin into their traditions or cultures or families or things like that, we might think it's a good thing for them to ultimately try to give it up.
Yeah, it's what we habituate ourselves to. You know, really. I mean, we habituate ourselves in a lot of ways, in a lot of different things. I mean, some people are habituated to sports, you know, or NASCAR or whatever. You know, there's different things you can be habituated to. That's the same thing. But the interesting thing, when you look at cultures like certain religious traditions, whether it's I'll just throw a couple out there, like Native Americans, or say Hindus. Hindus use dairy. It's actually, cow's milk is seen in Ayurvedic medicine as a medicine.
Right.
Of course, they don't ingest the amount of dairy that Westerners do by any stretch of the imagination, but nonetheless it's there. But the interesting thing is the ritual that has grown up around that. And I've talked to elders in Native American tribes, and I've been to the Maharishi Institute in Fairfield, Iowa, and spoke with people there, and doctors, practitioners who teach Ayurvedic medicine there. And the interesting thing is that what I've taken away from that is that humans are very good at developing coping mechanisms, and that one of those coping mechanisms is ritual. And when you look at like Native American hunting rituals, there's like a ritual in chanting or whatever. It depends on the tribe, but there is something before, during, and after the hunt, then killing an animal. And I've asked elders, I said, well, why do you do that? Well, it's to ask for forgiveness. From before, when we develop the intention, to the time we do the deed, and then afterwards to ask its spirit for forgiveness. Why do we do that? Why would humans do that? It's because you develop ritual around the things that you know that are innately wrong. You need to understand, you know, a lot of religious traditions have grown up that way, in that we develop a ritual because we need to feel better about ourselves. And I think that's something that we should at least consider, you know, mull over. You know, I'm not saying that that is an absolute hard fact, but in any case, it's something to consider because it's been my observation. And I've identified those things in my life, the things I've ritualized to make myself feel better that I know were wrong, you know.
So what happens when you go back and meet with friends from Michigan State or from your days as a farmer, or people in your family who are still in the industry or still consuming products of the industry? Do you have tensions? How do you confront this? I mean, how do you tell them this story about your change and now your current lifestyle in a way that's edifying?
Well, let me put it this way. I don't proselytize to anyone. So when I only engage people who ask questions. That is not my mission in life, and I really don't think it's the way that you change hearts and minds, is by being didactic and being preachy and being, you know, sermonizing on things that, you know, that they're not comfortable about.
Yeah.
You know, I recognize, again, this comes back to the golden rule. It wouldn't have worked with me if somebody had done that to me. So I try to honor other people's journeys, the paths they're on, and to respect where they're at. Not that I won't engage them, but I'll engage them where they're at. So if they have a curiosity, if they've got a question, I'll take it as far as it will go for them, but I'm not going to do like an information dump on them. For some people that works. Maybe for an engineer, you can like, oh, here's a book, read that, boom, they've made a conversion.
Right.
Because it's facts, it's science. For other people, but we're also emotional beings. So it's about, you know, paying attention, actively listening, and, you know, truly caring and nurturing, being, you know, for that other person. And that's how you change hearts and minds. I mean, you don't do it by force. You don't do it by coercion, by being passive-aggressive. You do it by just listening.
So friends still in the industry think you've gone AWOL in this crazy way, but they're still your friends.
A few, yeah. We get along. They tolerate me and stuff, but we talk. And I was up in Michigan recently for a couple of weeks, and I got to hang out with some people I haven't seen in 40 years. And it was so interesting to engage them and they had all these questions. But the interesting thing is that they had all these questions because they had heard that I had become this other person that was so different. But then, when we had a couple beers and sat down and talked for a couple hours, they said, you're really no different. And I go, no, I'm still Harold Brown. It's just
You're drinking vegan beer.
Yeah, exactly. But no, the thing is it's just that I always try to. It has been something that was taught to me by my grandparents and my parents is that our main mission in life is to really understand what it takes to practice and exhibit unconditional love and to be a better person than you were yesterday.
So maybe just the last question, tell us a little bit about what FarmKind is and what it's doing and what you want to do with it.
Well, FarmKind is a nonprofit I started a few years ago, and it's a bit of a resource for people who are curious about farm animal issues or environmental issues or social justice issues. That's what the website is for. What I do is that I travel around the country to people who invite me to speak about a wide range of things, whether it's environmental justice, social justice, species rights, or all of those things. Because there's an intersectionality with all of them. They are bound together. And too often we tend to, in our kind of reductionist way of doing things, we compartmentalize all those things, and they're treated separately. I try to bring them together to show that there's a larger picture to consider. And so I do that, and I talk to a really wide range of audiences and people and so on, and it's very rewarding. Doesn't pay my bills. I've got a full-time job that takes care of that, because Lord knows in the nonprofit world you can't make a living doing that. So, and have integrity. But it's it is very rewarding, and I've met so many absolutely wonderful people in that journey.
Great. Well, Harold Brown, thanks for coming and talking to us and sharing some of your stories and views.
It's my honor to be of service.